It's Mike Brennan. We're back with our second edition of Michigan Marijuana Today, and I have to credit to Tim Beck for coming up with that name. Uh, I've left 420 Post, but I have not left the cannabis community, so we're picking up a lot more coverage at MITech News, and this is one of the new action items. So let me introduce the aforementioned Tim Beck. Say hi to the audience.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
All right, and then our guest host is Jamie Lowell. Anybody in the industry knows Jamie doesn't need much of an introduction because he's been around like way back when everything got started. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today is what it was when it got started and where it is now, right, Jamie?
Yeah, yep. We're veering off the intended path a little bit.
All right, let's
I think,
delve into that. What's your thoughts? How did the path change and where is it headed now?
Tim, are you jumping in? I'm sorry.
yeah, I would say that the most dramatic philosophical change, if you want to use that description, was that the creators of this law that passed in 2018 really wanted to have a true free market situation, unlimited licenses, ability for anybody to get into the business, and that's all seems to have changed. And partly it's due because of the well, maybe we were too successful, in the sense of the overproduction and the stress that it's put on certain, business players. And I would say to some degree it's big operators too. And some of them want the law changed. They want to revert to a model, let's say like Illinois or New Jersey or something like that, where they have only a very few select, companies controlling the market. I think that's where a lot of this is coming from. There's little people too, a little smaller players that feel that maybe the system's screwed up and they can get grandfathered in. But that's the way the fundamental difference. And now there's nothing been done. There's been just a lot of talk in the legislature. A lot of bills have been bandied around for the last couple of years, but nothing seems to move. Really, I mean, the only thing that's moved is this still a 24% wholesale tax. But that's in a nutshell. That's my take on it. What's going on?
Jamie?
Well, that's exactly correct, and those some of those things include irrational reliance on maintaining cannabis as a Schedule One drug in this state in order to recriminalize action that has not been criminalized for several years and hasn't been an issue under the guise of stopping big, large illegal gardens. Or something like that. I think we were talking earlier, and Tim brought up that there is some movement on a bill to um, put into statute conditions for the new lab from the CRA to get up and running, and that's fine. And I think there's a lot of great uses for that lab potentially, but it also represents an issue with even other bills, and that is that this new director Hannah and the group there at CRA doesn't want to use its authority effectively as we kind of originally intended to do things like stabilize the market and make things more efficient and better and create new conditions. They could write rules for their to operate their lab without having to put this into statute, but they tend to want to have everything be changed by law, and that's really inefficient. Things don't get done, and it seems like when they do
Mhm.
use their authorities for things that don't make quite as much sense or don't head in the same direction that we would want to, and that's a fundamental issue with just how things are unfolding. I think it ties into what Tim was saying too about the pressure, from some players in the industry, and how they would like to ultimately see things be affected. There's the license cap thing that which would create local and regional monopolies and oligarchies as the bipartisan report on that points out, and there's I know there's several of these out there, and none of them are like representative of making things more broad and open and free as was originally intended. And there's a concerted effort not just in Michigan but nationally, as well on this. So we're not alone, but it is particularly disturbing because this is where we are.
And speaking of the
Jamie,
24% tax, there's a movement afoot now to move it directly to the Michigan Supreme Court. Let's talk about that.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, this news just broke I don't know, just in the last week. I did not know about this. Apparently, the documents were signed on the 26th of February. And it was a consent agreement between the MICAA, the Holistic Health Group, and the defendants, the Attorney General, the state of Michigan that wants this tax to go forward. And it does. It puts parameters there. They've signed off, and I get the impression if everything works smoothly, we may have an answer by September. Is my reading, of the whole thing, and I would say that's why not just get it over with. I think we got a good chance to win on the merits of the case. I'm always hopeful, and so on. But this is a big deal because a lot of folks thought that this was going to drag out for 2 3 years, and it could, unless it's expedited. That's been the history of these cases for years. That living wage thing that passed, and the GOP and the Senate kind of gutted it, and then it went around. It took 3 years to get a ruling as to whether the GOP did the right thing, that adopt and amend kind of thing. But again, I would say that's a positive thing. At least people will know sooner rather than later.
Since we didn't get the restraining order from the Court of Claims judge, I think
Right.
Judge Patel, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
and they, the, the judge may not have been just supporting the governor or just hating cannabis or anything like that. They tend to want to preserve budgetary things and view that as priority. Even though, as we all think, I believe that our state constitution is pretty clear in that you can't effectively change, the MRTMA with a standalone bill that only requires a simple majority, which is, part of the issue. But there's a lot of people throughout the process that are feeling unsure, knowing that there's a court case in place that could change all this anytime, yet it's in motion now. And I think there's a lot of stress to figure out sooner than later, what the resolution is. So since the first judge didn't grant the restraining order, we may as well get to the highest courts as soon as possible and get some type of resolution.
Yeah. I got a laugh out of this because the road builders are really concerned. They're afraid they're going to lose, and they've been pressuring for some kind of decision.
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how it was done way back in September, I believe it was, or they kind of did a midnight workaround, shall we say? I'm trying to be gentle. That it's not the way things are supposed to be done. Why don't we go into a little detail on that and why you guys think this is going to get overturned by the Michigan Supreme Court?
Well, I mean, the details of like how they kind of did it, surreptitiously and that kind of stuff. I mean, I think they were challenged, and that was not one of the things that the judge, bound over for, the to further hear on. So I don't know if that still remains an issue or not. But this really started when the governor proposed it, in I think February,
Yeah.
and a lot of us said, "Hey, that's really stupid." Not only do you damage an already kind of fragile industry by something like that, it is it's contrary to our state constitution. It makes a mockery of the ballot initiative process and
Yeah.
just chooses to sidestep that without requiring the
Yeah.
proper processes to amend it. Which is a big problem, and kind of didn't think that I not surprised necessarily with how things work in government and stuff, but thought somebody along the way would say, "Hey, this is way too much of a challenge to overcome. You
Yeah.
just can't do this." And I
Yeah.
was in the group of people writing the MRTMA, and in fact, so was Attorney Matt Abel and Jeff Hank and many others, Robin Schneider and Sam Ousman, who are with MICAA also, were part of that. We've all signed affidavits saying we purposely intended for there not to be a wholesale tax. And in fact,
Yeah.
I have notes from that whole process where we had a wholesale tax included in the language at one point, and then took it out on purpose and described to each other why. The name is the Michigan Regulate Tax Marijuana Act. It
Yeah.
is the tax structure for cannabis, and it was created through the ballot process. The fact
Yeah.
that they decided, well, because some weird interpretation of some language somewhere, that you can just have a standalone bill, call it something, it's called the Road Tax Act or something like that, and only requiring a simple majority, and now you can like change the tax structure of that's what they did. It should be very clear that they can't do that, but yet the process moves on.
Well, here the thing that's being really, you're right, Jamie, in the sense that I think that argument we lost, okay, in Judge Patel's opinion.
The first
What's
judge,
being
yeah.
litigated, because they had this wording in there that could be interpreted as confusion. Said they established this tax or any other tax. And they're saying, "Aha, look at
I
that."
understand all that. That's
Yeah,
still not strong enough
but
to overcome the state
yeah,
constitution language.
yeah. But what's being litigated, and this could still be a fatal flaw for the defendants, what's really going to trial is the sneaky, unorthodox, illegal way that they did it. In the legislature, that midnight kind of stuff, the bait and switch on the bill, nobody even knew what was going on. It was
I
really
was under the
horrendous,
impression
highly unethical.
that the judge was okay with all of that. I guess hopefully I was wrong.
My take is that's what's being litigated. I mean, again, was the way they did it. See, and what will happen if it can prove that it was illegal the way they passed the law? That's the end. That's the end for them. I mean, that's my take. I'm,
Okay, well I
uh,
hope that that's true because the
well, you can still appeal, Jamie. You can still
the judge,
appeal.
yeah, it's got a whole long
Yeah,
process, and for sure will end up in the Supreme Court. So the fact that there might be an avenue just to get it there is what we were saying. You may as well just take it right there. The Judge Patel also said that there needs to be a hearing on, there needs to be uh, exploration on the intention of the drafters. And really,
yes.
what she should mean by that, in my opinion, is the intention of the voters. But they kind of go hand in hand. And myself, Matt Abel, and Jeff Hank did submit an amicus brief describing our intentions as drafters. And that was
Hmm.
there. So when she says we need to look at this, then maybe that means something. We don't know until the process
Hmm.
actually plays out. How significant that is, we don't know, but that was said. And as drafters, and then how we campaigned thereafter included discussing the 10% tax, why it was just a 10% on retail, the whole thing. Voters knew what they were voting for. It wasn't like just because we didn't discuss it, it was just now up for grabs just to make a new one. And it still is the tax structure for cannabis. So to change it, you should still need the supermajority
Yeah,
vote.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
anyway,
and
that's
there's and
disagreement on that. Here we are.
there's already been a casualty from the wholesale tax. C3 Industries had a big grow, and in February they just shut it down and walked away from it, and something like 65 people lost their jobs. And I know I've heard, and I haven't had a chance to do the FOIA request, but I've heard there's a lot more companies moving into receivership now because it's a tough industry. It was a tough industry with low prices before. I think we have the lowest prices in the country, and I know that when we first came out in 2018, and I was talking to some of the very optimistic dispensaries and growers, they pegged that the value they were looking at was $4,000 a pound, and now it's down below $1,000 a pound. So I mean, they should have looked at legacy markets, but whatever. But I mean, the point being is it's already having an impact. And then the other question is, okay,
Well,
let's
well, that's what
say
I add to you say, and many people haven't expanded, or companies haven't expanded, nor even just opened when they plan to now because of the tax as
right.
well.
And the other issue, I guess, is kind of like the Trump tariffs. If the Supreme Court rules against this, then what? Do they have to refund the money back to the various people that paid the 24% tax? What do you think?
Well, they're not going to. I mean, they might just quit charging the tax. That'd probably be the best that we get out of it.
Yeah.
It might be a
Okay.
while. It might be a while before we see any money, on that. It might be a while before we see any money, yeah, on any type of rebate.
But I think they're going to start taking the tax sometime in April, I believe.
That's
But
correct.
yeah, so all right. Um, any other hot topics out there you want to touch upon?
Well, I
I have
mean,
a question for Jamie. Okay, Jamie, what is your take? Another thing that's a tail that seems to be wagging the dog in terms of so-called marijuana reform in Michigan is this whole hemp issue. that these hemp, these dealers, these products are not being taxed, they're not being regulated, and some of the legislation that's come up to regulate it also impacts our own business, the cannabis business, also. And of course, people are pointing to the fact that they're non-competitive because of this, evil hemp industry, or so they say. I mean, I have very mixed feelings. That's why I'm asking you. I've yet to form a real hard, solid opinion on this one.
Well, this is still along the lines of what you were saying. People who have big investments in this, who don't have historical perspective, don't have cultural perspective, are just looking for a new opportunity and to satisfy the bottom line, view anything outside of what they're doing as competition and as a threat to that. I was kind of hoping that you can't distinguish between hemp and cannabis. It's really difficult. So the product, so many products can be made from it now. It just kind of helps to demonstrate how maybe futile it will be in the long run to even like worry about trying to come up with new ways of enforcing these things. Yet they are trying to make new machines to determine, what's hemp and
Hmm.
what's cannabis,
Hmm.
and when somebody's over a certain point of something, or all this kind of crap, instead of just leaving it alone and kind of treating it as it is. And that's part of this backslide. There's these all these this disinformation, misinformation, quote unquote studies coming out, and they point to, oh, it's really horrible, but we still need it for some things. It's kind of like, this is new age propaganda that's going on, and big money interests are just trying to grab the market. That's what I think that's reflective of.
Well, there's some
Hmm.
talk about the liquor industry maybe behind some of this stuff, particularly with the hemp products. The Delta 8 and whatnot. What we just had Blaine Bechtold from iHemp Michigan on last week, and he said a simple solution would just make it you can't buy any of these hemp related products or hemp products with hemp in them or the derivatives thereof unless you're 21 years old. That way, that's more controlled because there's this big hullabaloo about, high school kids getting high on Delta 8 on their lunch breaks or whatever. And what do you think of that idea? Just move.
I think
And
that's been
that,
going on for longer than this recent investigation or whatever. Probably not with Delta 8 necessarily, but
yeah.
I think that the alcohol industries realize that there's a downtick in alcohol consumption, and along with cannabis being more available, and there's been some discussion and attempts to like get in on the cannabis industry by the alcohol industry. So the fact that they're trying to compensate for this new world scenario makes a lot of sense to me. Whether or not that happens, I don't know, but yeah, it should be simple. The solution should be simple. It doesn't require a bunch of restrictions and prohibitions and huge regulations and all this kind of stuff. We don't view it as it is. If we treat cannabis or hemp by its nature, then we're not as worried about this and making a big deal about it.
Well, there was an intriguing story that just popped just the last day or two about how the Wholesale Beverage Association, a big alcohol trade group in Washington, is now weighing in, and they want hemp, beverages, okay, uh, taken out of that law that the Congress has passed about abandoning, gutting the hemp industry. And they would like to have it so they could sell hemp beverages, which ties into your thing, Jamie. In that they're losing market share because again, it's mostly younger people that just aren't into alcohol anymore. And they're more oriented toward cannabis and hemp and stuff like that. But they weighed in, and usually the hemp industry was, I mean, really disliked the cannabis industry and vice versa. They were always fighting among each other. One group wants the other restricted or banned, and on and on. And now this is the first time I've seen a major trade group weigh in favor of getting regulated.
Yeah, that was the
Like
one. Yeah, I didn't like everything when some of those things were being discussed. That's the one thing that I kind of saw as a positive. We're normalizing it more. It's just done like all these other, quote unquote adult beverages, and
yeah,
fine. You have them everywhere. Have them in the gas station if I want to, if I
right
want
on.
on my way up north or whatever, you know,
Yeah,
I want it there.
yeah. No, I mentioned the last show. Well, maybe bears repeating that I was always skeptical of Delta 8 and this and that until I wrote a column for Ben Horner's magazine some time ago when the industry started to pop. So being a good journalist, I had to try it. Okay, so I got it's the Delta 8 gummies, 25 milligram. I really like it. I still use it because I mean, as I've gotten older, years ago when I was younger, I always want looking for the most intense high out there and on, but not anymore. You know, as I've gotten on in years, I like the result of the Delta 8 gummies, and it's very predictable. That's a thing about it that I kind of like. I know when it's going to start. I know how long it's going to last. I know when it's going to peak, and everything else. So there's value. There is value, and
So
I
they're
think I
relatively
hope.
new. Some people don't like the idea that we don't know as much about it because it's only been being,
Yeah,
made in the last few years and stuff, but it doesn't seem to be like radically different, and people have not, I don't think, described huge symptoms or, side effects or anything like that, from it. So probably okay. And I like the idea that there's, diversity out there for selection for people because if people find out what works for them, just like you did. And I've heard the same thing from other people about Delta 8. And of course, many other forms and types of cannabis too. And all of it should be out there readily available for whoever needs it, wants it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, a lot of people use the hemp-related products to help sleep at night, to minimize pain, or in the case of a lot of veterans, PTSD. I've never been a veteran, never been shot at, so I can only speculate what that does to your psyche. But I mean, it really helps a lot of people. And again, I could get back to the fact that okay, if they're all hung up on the fact that kids can get their hands on it, just make it a
yeah,
21 thing and maybe even move it into the provisioning centers as
hmm
they now want us to describe it, right? So
yeah,
what do y'all
yeah.
think? I
Well, it's
mean,
provisioning center when you're talking about medical, and it's a retail store when you're talking about just
right.
adult use.
I would, my thought, my thought here is that is there's nothing unreasonable putting an age limit 21 and this kind of thing, and it also would behoove the cannabis industry and the hemp industry to stop the war on each other. They have much more in common than what sets us apart. That's my thought about it, and hopefully this trend is starting pretty soon. I read another
Make it
story
easier
a
for
few
those
weeks ago.
industries to invest in each other and work with each other.
Yeah,
We're already
yeah,
really
I
behind. Many
agree.
other countries are trading with other countries. Our states don't even trade with each other. There's some hemp activity, but that's not reaching its potential yet. There's a move. Maybe Blaine talked about it last week. I know that there's movement to try to get more industrial side of the hemp industry
Yeah,
up
and
and
he
running
also
with
said
using
there's a
hemp as raw
movement
material.
to, the ban is supposed to start in November, but there's a movement afoot, as it were, to push it back at least another year so they can really study it rather than just, and he had the same reaction. Because he's been working with the folks in Washington, and they thought they had this all worked out, and at the last minute, when it went to the floor, not only in the state and in D.C., the very conservative people came in and put the kibosh on hemp for reasons that no one quite understands. But yeah, it's a mess.
No.
Well, when things don't make sense, it's about preserving the resources somewhere for somebody, usually.
Yeah, well, somebody's the way they make money. I'm trying to be gentle here.
Yeah,
Was threatened,
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's and they have the money to buy the politicians, with the not buying them officially, but
Look what
they
happened in
donate to
Texas.
their
I mean, you have this
Yeah.
campaigns, right?
Well,
So
incredibly
here's
conservative governor who doesn't like cannabis that was talked into keeping the loophole hemp stuff alive because of all the business that it was generating.
well, a lot of this stuff doesn't seemingly make sense, but if you look at it in the context of the prohibitionist mentality, there are hardcore prohibitionists out there that anything that gets one high, okay, they don't even like drinking, these people, okay? Marijuana, hemp, and hemp was an easy target for them. They couldn't really knock out marijuana at a congressional level, but due to misinformation, fanaticism, control by certain, by prohibitionists, they were successful in passing that stupid thing, and they played it very well. They played their cards quite well, and they succeeded. And again, we mentioned on the last show, there was the Pew Institute did a poll. 23% of the American population believes that marijuana is morally wrong. Morally wrong. Think, what does that mean? That's like a religion. That's the equivalent of a religion. And if in a religion, if you're a hardcore believer, you're not going to compromise. You'd rather just go down in flames. Fine, they will fight. They will fight it to the bitter end. And some of these people are in control. They're in positions of power, and
particularly
that's my
now, right?
theory is how they
You know,
succeeded.
so yeah. So another story that popped up yesterday that caught my attention and made me laugh is the U.S. Army is having a hard time recruiting. Can't imagine why, huh?
Yeah.
And so not only did they raise the age that you can join to 42, I think it was 36 before, but they decided to waive the requirement that you have some sort of dispensation because you used cannabis somewhere in your past or something like that. Now the only change or the only option there on that was if it was a felony bust, then you can't join the service. But I was reading some statistics this morning, and only 23% of the military age population can qualify to join the military for a variety of reasons. They could be overweight, they could be LBGT now because there's the craziness going on with that, all sorts of stuff. So they're desperate. They were way down in the recruiting numbers, but I thought it was kind of funny that the Army, hey, if you smoke weed at some time, no big deal, you can still join. However, that being said, if you do join, then they do a blood test to make sure you're still not doing it. But I thought, geez, even the
But
Army is like coming around, right?
I remember the Treasury Department, now probably a few years ago, announced that they were lifting the restriction of cannabis use as requirement for joining because they needed to find computer people to combat the hackers. And if without lifting the cannabis restriction, they couldn't find them. Probably similar. Although I do remember too when coming across a few military people. I guess it might depend on very specifics of where you are in the military, what the commanders or the leaders or whatever that immediately think about it. But we had people coming into the stores that were in military, and they were able to do that as long as they were home and they were in a state where it was legal. So
Wow.
that was going on a few years back.
Yeah. Well, I remember this is years and years and years ago before weed was ever legal in the state of Michigan. And they had a buddy of mine, and he was a really talented engineer. People really wanted this guy over at Chrysler, and he peed bad. Okay, and they wanted him so bad. They were supposed to. He was supposed to, or the supposedly gonna. Well, you can't hire. Well, they sat around, they talked with him, and coddled around and on, and then they hired him. Okay,
Well,
so.
that's kind of the situation now. Everybody, there's a skilled labor shortage, uh, and the army now is competing against private industry for the same people. And those people can, they join the army if they want, but they can make a hell of a lot more money in the private industry than they're going to get paid in the army. But point being is, they're now in the pool with everybody else, right?
I think if I remember correctly, North Korea kind of figured it out because they don't have the influence of the UN or that kind of stuff, and they realize, hey, if we give the workers some cannabis, things work out a little bit better for everybody.
Mhm.
Everybody's mellow, right? So. All right. Any other final thoughts before we close this chapter? Anything you
Hash
want to
Bash is
say?
coming up.
Yeah.
Please
Oh,
come out.
let's talk about your brochure you're going to be handing out at Hash Bash.
Well, I mean, every Hash Bash we have a guide or a program, and it has good information about that event, about some of the specific speakers and other historical facts, and it helps us to raise the funds that it takes to put on the event. And so that will be ready to go, and then you pick that up day of event by attending the event.
And then,
And
of course, at the Hash Bash this year, the U of M says no one can smoke marijuana. I'm not sure how they're going to enforce that one unless they've got about 1,000 people coming in uniform. But what do you think of that? I
well,
mean,
there will be increased police presence there. I can't speak for them, but I get the feeling that their major concern is going to be people who like set up the little mini stores like on the grass and then
Mhm.
sell cannabis and mushrooms and things like that.
pre
I think they
roll,
don't want
get
that.
your pre roll, right? So.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
never been part of our event. That's just, it's been something that's happened, but the university has chosen to not enforce that. I don't know if you remember a few months ago, citing Hash Bash is one of the reasons they denied a permit to the organizers of EntheoFest. And so the university had to be sued. They said similar things that they said in the 90s to try to prevent Hash Bash from going on. They had to be sued. They lost. We were thinking that we might have to engage again this year, but they've been, fairly reasonable. But they do believe that they need to have increased presence there. They're concerned about what's happened at other events around the country, some other things. So we'll see how far they take it. But I think the concern is stopping the sales that have proliferated over the last 4 or 5, 6 years or so.
And another change is Charlie Strackbine won't be having his Monroe Street Fair anymore, unless that's changed. Now, last I knew, he threw up his arms and said he wasn't doing it this year. Do you know anything different?
That's current status. Yeah, I mean, if there's a last minute decision to put it on, then I guess that'll be exciting. But it doesn't seem like it's heading in that direction now. It's getting pretty late, and
Yeah,
he's
you're only a
maintaining that
couple
it's
of
just not
weeks
going on.
away, so
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's coming up fast. All right, cool. Any other points you want to make before I let you all go?
No,
We're
good
good?
show. Good show.
Yeah, be
Yeah.
careful. I would say if somebody out there has a even a home garden or a garden in their outbuilding or something like that, that's not necessarily a big deal. Just be aware that it is vulnerable for some type of inspection or action or something like that. It's happening a lot more often these days now. So be a little bit more vigilant. Don't be as complacent as it has been over the last few years.
I wasn't aware of
Is that
that.
the
Okay.
is that the CRA that's doing that?
There is a
Is that
new Michigan State Police department or task force that's tobacco and
ah
marijuana, and they are doing
okay.
it. And they are doing things like they hear about a grow going on, and I tend to think they don't care about the fact that there are things outside of the commercial system that are legal, and they figure out a way to get in there where they say, "Oh, the energy bill was too high," or they have a CI that says that somebody sold to somebody who wasn't a patient, or something like that. So just like 10 years ago, and they get on the property and uh, y- uh, take items of value and take down people's gardens, and it's all that stuff's happening again.
Really? I thought that you could grow up to 12 plants for your personal use. Am I wrong on that?
You can do that, and you can also there's still the medical system where you could be a caregiver for up to 5 patients
Hmm.
and have a larger grow than 12, and also up to 24, just under the MRTMA, is still just a civil infraction. But in order to even count those plants, there has to be some really good reason to think that something outside of what the people are allowed to do is going on. And they're doing things like calling the CRA and saying, "Hey," and it's a house, so they know what the answer is, and they're saying, "Hey, does this place have a commercial license?" And it's
Mm.
stuff like that. And I will tell you that it is confirmed, and I'm going to get more details on it. Um, that the funds that come into the CRA are being given to that task force to use for enforcement. And I don't like that. I have to synthesize that. I have to find out exactly what's going on and determine if I'm okay with not saying anything more about it, because I don't like the concept of that at all. And again, another sign of how things are kind of backsliding and how CRA isn't directing its authority, I think, in intended directions and that type of thing.
Speaking of backsliding, look what's happening in Ohio, right? The legislature made radical changes to the voter approved initiative. And yeah, the question is it's sort of happening in Michigan. Is it going to get worse, right? So
Yeah. I
I'd like to
I
think
don't
that
know if it's good. I
yeah,
don't think it's going to get that bad in Michigan. Why? The difference between Michigan and Ohio, it only takes a simple majority to change a ballot initiative. In Michigan, we got that quarters
yeah, usually we
a
do, yeah.
rule for firewall. That's tough. That's a tough hurdle.
And like I'm pretty sure there's enough people in the Senate at least that are hip enough not to allow a lot of this stuff to go through. Fortunately for us right now.
I agree.
Senator Irwin's in his final months
I
of
agree.
serving in the House and the Senate completely, which is a loss for us in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, another loss is we're going to have is Stephanie Chang. She's head of judiciary
she's
and
stopped
whatever
a
the
lot of
hell.
the really stupid bills from coming
Yeah, and
into
that
the committee.
stupid saliva bill,
Yeah.
is now, that was passed by the House is in her committee, and she told myself what's and there's another person named right.
Amy from Weedsters got a.
Yeah. That's right. No, she told us directly it's not going to see the light of day. It will not. So it's not going to become law. But I'm concerned that these people are fanatics. They want that passed. There's a big money in this testing stuff, and they're going to come back again. Okay, in the next term. And Stephanie has been just such a wonderful firewall for us. I mean, she's real solid, and I think sadly she's going to be on her way out because of term limits.
Okay.
Got it good now.
All
Yeah.
right. So, Jamie, why don't you tell people how they can reach out to you if they want to discuss anything with you or
Well, I'm on all the standard social media platforms, just as myself. I'm open to being contacted that way. My number's on some of those things. I'm here.
all right, sounds good. And Tim, what's the best way to reach you?
Just email me. Tr trbeck1@gmail.com.
Okay, and I'm Mike Brennan, and you can reach me at my last name, Brennan, at MITechNews.com. If you'd like to be on the show, if you got some great ideas you want to talk about, run them by me. I'll take a look at them and let you know if we can get you on the show, that is.